Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Nick Thompson. You may know me from Netflix Love is Blind, but on this podcast, we sit down with guests from all walks of life to hear their story, remove stigmas, and uncover what makes them tick. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations with Nick Thompson. I'm your host, Nick Thompson. The world has been speaking to me, or as I like to say, the universe is talking to me. Over the last couple months, I've had a lot of life changes, as a lot of you know. I'm trying to trust my intuition, listen to the universe, and figure out what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, what my path forward is. I'm open to the universe speaking to me more now than I probably ever have been, and it's doing it, and I'm listening. Today's guest is Ariana Vargas. She is the founder of the mental health support app named STIGMA. And this app is designed to help people connect with one another and give support when they're struggling. So with that caveat, how did I meet Ariana or come in contact with her? This is where the universe is speaking to me. A couple weeks ago, I did not want to go to the gym. It was cold. It was wet, as it is here in Chicago this time of year. I forced myself to go to get out of the house. Then when I got there, I didn't really feel like working out. So I started sort of meandering around and doing a little bit. And I finally got myself in a nice groove. And I noticed a former coworker that I knew but didn't know. And so you know how that goes. You're walking around and then all of a sudden you end up in a conversation neither one of you really want to be in, but you feel like it's like your due diligence to do it. And I just wasn't in a small talk, catching up kind of mood. As I'm getting ready to leave, I'm kind of dodging this gentleman. I think he's kind of probably doing the same thing maybe. So I go to leave, and I usually do 100 push-ups a day. I decided today I was going to show myself some grace and skip the push-ups. So I go to leave, get to the locker room, and this gentleman is heading there as well. And so I was like, well, I think this is the universe telling me I need to go do some push-ups. So I go into the studio, and I start doing some push-ups. A gentleman in the studio comes up to me, a separate one, and he says, "Hey, are you that marketing executive from Love is Blind?" This is the first time anyone's remembered that I was a marketing executive, so kudos to that. But anyway, I started talking to this person, and he was telling me his story about how he quit his well-paying tech job under the assumption that he was going to go start the next $1 million company. And so he's in his startup journey right now, and he's telling me what he's doing. I'm throwing some ideas from a marketing perspective out there, and he asks me what I'm doing now that I recently was laid off from my tech job, and so I said, I don't know. I'm kind of just listening to the universe, trying to figure out what to do next. I was talking to him a little bit about what I do and talk about through my social media and practice in my real life around mental health. And he said, oh, I have this friend, Ariana, who just won a award for her app from Google, her app STIGMA, which focuses on mental health. I said immediately, I was like, oh, I'd love to talk to her, thinking, oh, maybe, she can come on the podcast. I could get to meet someone. We'll see what happens. A little bit later, she DMs me. We start talking back and forth. We meet and get coffee. The universe has been talking to me and pushing me into this direction that I am certainly uncomfortable going in, but I've been listening to. So as I sat down for coffee with Ariana, which was probably going to be an hour when we both agreed to go grab coffee, turned into hours, let's just say, and sharing each other's stories, where we came from, what we're doing, what prompted her to start STIGMA, what her vision for it is. And the vision is beautiful. It's literally to crowdsource hope for one another. And when I heard her passion and learned a little bit about her, learned a little bit about STIGMA, I immediately wanted to have her on the podcast as soon as possible for a couple of reasons. One is the vision's beautiful. And if you stop what you're doing right now, don't pause this, but just go download the app and explore a little bit. So we had a lot in common, not just from a mental health perspective and what we're trying to accomplish and, our own personal journeys, but she also had some great other interests that we shared, which I think we'll probably end up talking a little bit about here today. I'm always so enamored by the passion people have around specific topics, uncovering their true passion and what they're supposed to be doing in the world. And I'm going through that journey right now in my quest to listen to the universe and in my quest to trust my intuition again. You know, I ended up meeting a wonderful person who's doing a wonderful thing with the STIGMA app. And the STIGMA app is free. There's no fee. It's free for anybody to use. It gives you an opportunity to ask someone for hope if you're struggling based on what you're struggling with. It allows you to go on and share hope with someone else who's struggling. And you can do this through a variety of different methods, through video, through text, through voice memos. And so I spent a little time on the app, and I'm super excited to have Ariana on, but not just to talk about the app, but to talk about her personal journey. I'm going to let her tell her story. It's a tough one to hear at times, but I'm so proud of her being able to share it. And I'm going to ask her all about it here in just a little bit. I hope you all listen to this and hear from someone who has their own very personal journey with mental health from, a family, a generational family, and then also with her own, and then how she's trying to channel all of this love and this hope, being a mental health advocate that she is, and turn this into something that is actually good for the community and good for people. And of course, most importantly, removing the stigmas surrounding mental health. Thank you, Ariana, for what you do. I hope you guys enjoy this interview. I think you're going to find it helpful. And I definitely recommend go download the STIGMA app, and you might just see me on there too. So thank you all very much and enjoy this interview. Let's get to it. I'm so bad at repeating things back because I'm so worried about repeating it back the right way that I forget it. So it's the same with names. When I meet someone for the first time, I'm like, "Oh, hi, Ariana, nice to meet you." And then it's the name's already gone.
Gone that second. Yep. Yeah, I know. I'm the
gone.
Same way. It's the worst, especially when you're an empath and you care about people. You're like, you matter, but I don't know your name.
Well, that's the core of what makes it so important is I want to remember their name because I really do care. And then it's shit, it's gone. Our guest today is Ariana Vargas. Ariana was born in Costa Rica to a father with schizophrenia. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker and the founder of the app STIGMA, which Google just named the best app for good in 2022. Ariana, thank you for coming on the show. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm good. I'm excited to be here. I love talking about mental health, especially with people who are advocates and care about having these conversations. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so cool. I've been talking, and I already said this to you, about how the universe is talking to me and I'm listening now instead of ignoring it. And I want to, talk about the way we met a little bit, which was very funny. I met a guy randomly at the gym that recognized me from Netflix. And then through our conversation, 45-minute conversation, he mentioned that he knew you and that you had founded the app STIGMA. And 2 days later, we spent a couple hours over coffee talking about some of the possibilities of your app and what you're trying to do. And I think it's wonderful. So I'm so glad to have you on.
Thank you. Me too. I'm really glad that Andrew made that connection. It was really funny. I was just sitting on my couch and I got a text that said, "Hey, I met this guy from Love is Blind and you got to meet him because he's all about mental health." And I was like, let's do it.
And here we are. So I like to start with a couple small talk questions. We'll get the juices flowing, break the ice, get some fun stuff out of the way. This is my new favorite question to ask. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
It changed, but it was kind of funny because I couldn't choose one thing.
It changes for everyone. That's the trend I'm noticing. That's why I started asking. So walk us through the changes.
So I wanted to be a monkey trainer. That was the job. I loved monkeys and that was what I wanted to do. So when I was asked that question, I just made it up. So I like that I didn't pull from a catalog of what could be. I just imagined that has to be a job. And then I had a friend whose dad was an architect and I thought it was the coolest thing to get to draw for a living and make buildings. And so I remember telling my mom, I want to be an architect. And she said, well, what about being a monkey trainer? And I said, oh, well, I'll be an architect who also trains monkeys. So I was really diversifying, side hustle of monkey training. And then when I got a little bit older, but still pretty young, I decided I wanted to be a pediatrician. I always loved kids and working with kids and babysitting and nannying. And I loved biology. I really loved understanding how the human body worked. And so I was certain I wanted to do that. I was even pre-med in college. So it was really what I thought I was going to do. And then a pretty big departure. So.
And where'd that departure go to?
I got into my pre-med classes my freshman year of college, and it was first semester freshman year. Bio, I loved. Almost everything else, I thought, wow, not only do I not enjoy this, I'm not very good at it. And I've been fortunate to be asked to speak at some colleges, so at my alma mater, Boston College, but then also at some Chicago universities. And when I speak to students, I always talk to them about the Ikigai purpose exercise, where you do the concentric four circles of what do I love to do? What am I naturally good at? What does the world need? And what can I get paid for? And I just think young people don't do that soon enough. It's just like
No,
the
they don't teach
way
you that in
you figure out what
school.
you know. And like that sort of turning in and reflecting and sort of for emotional reasons and mental health reasons, yes, but also to find your purpose. Like that is a purpose
Yeah.
exercise because it's the center of all of those things where you feel most satisfied. I could have never told you that I would be doing what I'm doing right now. But I do feel like I'm in the center of those circles, which is outstanding. But in bio was great. In the other pre-med classes, I looked around and I remember thinking, I'm not naturally good at this. There are
Hmm.
people around me who are, naturally gifted at this. So I'm working really hard to not do that well, and I don't enjoy it. And so I think I spent the first semester just fighting my way through it. By second semester, I thought, am I really going to spend all of my years in college doing this? And so I let myself think about what I would do if not that. And I was in the honors program at BC, which meant that I had 4 years of study that was studying the history of Western cultural tradition through the lenses of language,
Whoa. I didn't
literature,
see
art
that coming either.
history, sociology, theology.
Oh, I
And it was
think
this
I lost you.
beautiful course of study. But it was kind of like having an English major. So I thought I was a writer and I thought, well, that I don't want to do English because that, I'm already kind of doing that. I thought, well, what else do I love? I love photography and I love storytelling. And so I saw that there was a film major in like the catalog of what you could major in. And I went to an intro to film class and fell in love immediately. And from then on,
Mm.
that was the decision. But the conversation I remember, like so we moved from Costa Rica when I was really young, and we were on food stamps and free government lunch and like really struggled quite a bit. But
Wow.
I got scholarships to middle school, high school, and college. And I had worked very hard to get where I was. And it was sort of that like, immigrant story of the sure thing of be a doctor and you do the steps and you'll get there and you'll make enough money and
Mm.
you'll be comfortable.
The
And I
American
realized that
dream.
in the American dream, but in going with my heart, I was going to be happier. But I remember calling my mom and saying, I'm going to switch my major from, biology and pre-med focus to film and history. And she was like, what?
The hell you
But
are.
I'm thrilled that I did it. I joke a lot that I'm like happier than I've ever been and never been more broke. And I think that professional satisfaction is not all about how many zeros are on your paycheck. And I think today's world sometimes makes it confusing or can lead people to believe otherwise. But I will say that following my heart and going with mission driven and purpose driven work has been for me really, really satisfying.
I love that answer. And it's funny. This is the universe speaking again. Like I feel like we were brought together for this friendship, whatever you want to call it. And I said this yesterday to my therapist too. Like, I feel like you're a few months ahead of like my journey. So like I look at you and I hear you talk about like passion and purpose and being at the center of those 4 areas. Right. And that's like an exercise I've literally done. I just did myself last week because I got laid off about 6 weeks ago, and that might be breaking here for those who I don't think I talk about it socially, but I'm sitting here and I'm like, so I've done everything, which sounds crazy. Like I was a CMO for 4 or 5 months, and I've been working my whole career for that. And I'm like, I'm not happy. It doesn't matter how many zeros are on the paycheck. I am so much happier doing this, having tough conversations, worrying about, removing stigmas to these things. And the inner peace that you find when you get yourself out of that mindset. I'm still trying to get out of it. It's so interesting. And it's such a fulfilling thing to do. And you can, I know, you're in startup world right now, but you can find financial success in doing what matters to you and what you love. You've just got to find the right outlet. And so I think you doing that is an amazing story. The other thing I want us to note is the trend I'm noticing when I ask people what they want to be when they grow up is that it changes. And when you're young, and this is sad, but it goes with what you're saying. When you're young, it's so aspirational. It is like the craziest most ambitious. Maybe in some cases it doesn't even exist, but the world is your oyster when you're a kid. And then you go through school and you learn more and more about how the world works. And it just starts like kind of beating you down into this, like, well, I've got to go be a freaking doctor because that's just what you do. Or for me, growing up, it was, well, I don't want to, build stuff like my dad did. Excuse me. I wanted to be creative and write. And so it was like, it went from wanting to be a WWE wrestler, which is ironic considering Friday, but from that to like a filmmaker, well, marketing, because I love storytelling, and then, to reality TV survivor. So,
well, and I
it's
think
funny.
What you said, like it speaks to the fact that when we're young, we have enormous imagination. We are allowed to do it. We have the free space and time to do it. We don't have the responsibilities and the asks made of us as adults to do it. And I think that's the thing that, your shift in thinking like, I'm here, I've arrived at this thing that I thought I wanted and I'm not happy. It requires reframing, because to get to there, you operated in a certain way for a long period of time. And I think that reframing is the hardest piece, where you think to yourself, I can't survive on less money, or I can't survive without X, Y, or Z. And when people are forced into situations where they have to, they find a way. And I think that's the sort of, I talked to someone who said that the most valuable thing that they got out of being an entrepreneur was not the lessons they learned about business. It was that you never get a better lesson on yourself than being an entrepreneur, because you face tremendous stress and challenges. And it sounds cliche, but it's so true. There are days where I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if I can do this, where I really question myself. And then one thing happens the next day, or I just wake up feeling different the next day, or get a good workout in. And suddenly I'm like, I got this. I can do all of these incredible things. And I think the life of an entrepreneur gives you the opportunity to kind of flex those dreaming muscles in a way that when you're just going through routine, if you just feel like you're a cog in a corporate wheel somewhere, it's harder to find that. And it's not that you can't find it outside of the workplace, but I think it's, imagination is such an underutilized skill set the older we get, and we have to create space and time for that. And that's where stories come in. I think that's why, video streaming is the number one leisure activity in the entire world. Yeah. I think it's because we get to escape and we get to have, our imagination get stimulated in the work of others.
I absolutely agree with you. And the storytelling elements that people can tell visually with video streaming on YouTube, Vimeo, like whatever they're doing, it's funny enough, because I have a little group that I'm a part of, which is, me, and then, another reality TV personality, and then a couple people who are like influencers and built a following through Instagram. And we get together and we talk about like, okay, what is it like to wake up one day and have hundreds of thousands of followers versus taking 2 years to build from, 25 to, 100,000, 150,000. And some of the things that you learn in there are, what you're saying. It's like they're telling these stories about mental health, about wellness, about, holistic health, or whatever it is, but it's all the same. And when we were having this conversation, I was like, you guys, like every one of us who has a podcast, or every one of us who has content, like you need to be on YouTube. Like you need to visualize it. Like the days of podcasts being just two people talking and you're listening, like those are gone, or they're leaving and they're fleeting. So like video and visual storytelling is the future. Streaming is the future, and having, different forms of content in terms of, your TikTok, your reels, your quick content, your short film type of content, your short documentaries type of content. And then of course, long form conversations, documentaries, movies, shows, stuff like that. Like it's all kind of coalescing and coming around that like visual storytelling piece, which I think is super cool. So speaking of that, absolutely. What's your favorite show or movie that you've recently watched?
I mean, this, but one of my favorite movies of all time is Arrival. So it's not recent, but I have watched it recently. The sound design in that movie, they won an Oscar for it. They should have won more Oscars, but it's just, the music is inspiring. And then shows recently that I've watched, I came across like an article written about The Resort, which was on Peacock. And I found that like surprisingly captivating. So it's I don't know how to perfectly describe it. I would suggest people watch it, but there's like enough sort of lightheartedness and then also some surreal, imaginative kind of context to it, and characters that you want to get to know better, and some mystery, and so the mystery keeps you. And then there's of course the setting of a beautiful landscape of being in a resort. So I just feel like it was something that surprised me and really kept my attention. And I liked that
it's a
because
new show too.
yeah. And I mean, the thing is,
Yeah.
there's so much great content in the drama medium, like in that style of storytelling. But I think in a world where we know that the stories and the people we surround ourselves with are going to influence our perspective on the world. And so it's hard sometimes when you know that the really well done stuff is in the, Breaking Bad genre, or of the variety where there's crime or murder or just a lot of darkness. And so I think what I liked so much about that show was that there was mystery. So you still had a component of like gravitas of some sort, but you also got to have some fun. And there were some, pretty backdrops and things like that. So I liked that one.
I think like the comedy wrapped up in a story like that, it's such an art, right? Like I love scary movies, but I also love like scary movies that make fun of scary movies. So like I love the Scream movies, and I look at like that type of comedy, or Knives Out is another one. Like I love Jamie Lee Curtis, and every time I say, I'm like, if you're listening, please just like one of my posts about you, it would just make my life. But she's just amazing. She's such an amazing actress, and like movie like Knives Out or shows like The Resort sound like they're so captivating, but like they don't take themselves too seriously. And I think that that's such an art in filmmaking. It's hard to do. I don't think absolutely. I could tell that story.
Yeah. I mean, I think it takes teams of people who have been doing it their whole career, and you know what I mean? Right. Like that, it is an art that is a team sport and takes tons of practice.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Okay. Last small talk question. So I already know, because you told me earlier, you work out at like 2:00 in the morning, it seems like, but I want to ask you, like, when you have a cheat meal, or what's your favorite snack food, your favorite dessert, something like that, if you're sweet or salty?
I'm not a sweets person. I'm a salty person. I would say that like the thing that if it's on a menu and I like I'm not a person who like always stays away from junk food. I wish I could be like, I am so healthy and it's all flaxseed and organic everything. I do have a decent job, but I'm just not a person who's like, the one time a quarter that I have something bad for me. No, it's far more frequent than that. But my thing is mozzarella sticks. I love a good mozzarella stick. If it's on a menu, I want to order it. I want to try all of the different kinds. And there's one of my favorite mozzarella sticks is actually at Club Lucky in Bucktown, because they use like fresh buffalo mozzarella, and it's larger pieces. And then of course the sauce is very yummy. So if you want fancy mozzarella sticks, I like those. But then I will take the like ballpark mozzarella stick as well and be equally as happy, as long as it's hot enough. There's nothing sadder than like a too cold mozzarella stick.
When you bite it and it doesn't stretch.
Yeah, and it's just like biting into a string cheese. So have you seen the like meme about like, hey, do you want 8 pieces of string cheese? And you're like, no. And it's like, no. What if we cut them in half, dip them in batter, deep fry them, and you eat them before your meal? And it's like, yeah, I'll take that. And it's so funny to think about, because like that's what mozzarella sticks are. But I love that. I saw that and I felt very seen. I was like, yes, that is.
I have to shout out to my best friend Tom on the mozzarella sticks, because he gets them everywhere. So if he hasn't had Club Lucky, he's got to go try those. Yes. So I'm gluten free, and I haven't had mozzarella sticks out in a long time. But Feel Good Foods, I think they're called, they have gluten free mozzarella sticks now that you can buy in the store, and I will put them in my air fryer and I'll eat the entire package. And it's just like, okay, it's done. They're out of the house. Don't go down that food aisle, that frozen food aisle anymore. But have you had Roots mozzarella sticks?
Yes, okay. I have.
What do you think? I lust after them when I see them.
They are like the biggest, most meal-like mozzarella stick that exists.
And for those of you listening,
eating one is like eating a hot dog.
It is. You go look them up. Roots mozzarella sticks. They're gigantic in size. It's crazy. So yes. Cool. Oh, now I want mozzarella sticks. Okay. Get my mind focused again. All right. So, I I know we've talked a little bit about you, but I would love for you to share with the audience a little bit more about your background, where you grew up, what it was like growing up with, a father who suffered from schizophrenia.
Yeah, it was complex, but also like everyone's childhood shaped the person and adult that I am today. So I'm grateful for it. Um, so we were born in Costa Rica. My dad had not been diagnosed yet. And then when my parents separated, my mom moved to where she had family. Her dad was in Prairie Village, Kansas. And so that's where we moved. And that is where I grew up. So I had sort of this interesting traditional Midwestern upbringing, but we would go visit my family in Costa Rica because my dad was there. All of my dad's side of the family were there, and he had 3 siblings and I had grandparents. And so it was really lovely to go visit. We would go sometimes for a month at a time, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And we couldn't go every year, but it was also a unique time to kind of have this experience. And I think it would have been wildly different if I had been born in the 2000s, because there was no Skype, there was no FaceTime, there was no WhatsApp. And so communicating with anyone in my family in Costa Rica or with my father was very, very infrequent. So I remember we would get international letters, used to be in these envelopes that had like red and blue lines around the edges. And when I saw one of those, I was like, oh, okay, this is like a letter from my dad. And I didn't always, my mom didn't always read it to us. And part of that was because if he was really struggling and if there was stuff in there that would scare us, she just shielded us from that. So in some ways, there was a lot of trauma I probably would have been exposed to if I were living in a home with him or even living in the same, city, that I wasn't exposed to. What I will say is that I love my father very much. I know that he loves me. It's important to me to say when I do interviews like this, because I'm talking about my father, that I love him deeply. So even though trauma is involved in the history, I love him very much. He loves me very much. But the way that we express love, mental illness or not, is different for every human being. So there's the 5 love languages, like people know what that is. When someone is afflicted with something that can change their behavior, their perspective on the world, their perception of things, it will influence their relationships with other people. And so for me, I was in the United States growing up in this world where I was seeing dads in my school or my Girl Scout troop. I was seeing them on TV. And it's very hard not to form your perspective of things on the life experience you have and the stories you consume. That is how we form our perspective as human beings. And so what I saw when I looked around were all of these, models, because when you're out in public, everyone's on their best behavior. So great dads at the soccer game, at the father-daughter dance. And I never had that. And I longed for that. I had certainly like a hole inside that I couldn't have defined as a young person, but I just knew I wanted a dad. And then unfortunately, when I would go be with him, he was nothing like the dads in movies, or, the ones that I saw, and by no fault of his own. And so accepting that as a young person was really challenging. And I don't think I did it well for a long time. I cried a lot. And I remember, family members being like, it's not his fault. And this is this is how he knows how to love you. But when you're young, it's hard to accept that, because you want what you see in movies, and we want that with, romantic love, and we want that with friendship or jobs or whatever. And I think that's why real conversations like this matter so much, especially in a forum where, this goes on Instagram, where everyone knows that there are filters and people putting the best versions of their lives. And that's not the truth. Like, I did my hair today and my makeup and wore a nice jacket because I was going to be on this thing talking about, let me tell you about my business. And if anyone is watching this or listening to this and thinking, she's got it all together, I promise I don't. I was crying myself to sleep 2 nights ago. And it is because the stuff worth doing is hard, and it asks everything of you. Because if you finally get to that place, you get to a place where you have earned it, where you have earned what that thing is. And so I think what I earned in my relationship with my father is the strength to be able to meet people where they are, to see someone behave in a way that isn't reflective of who they always are. I do not believe that anyone is a product of their worst action on their worst day. There are a lot of us who can, pretty much every human being can think of something they've done that they're like, I shouldn't have done that. That is not my best self. I wish I hadn't done that thing. And I think that when you're struggling with your mental health, whatever the condition, disorder, situation that you're in, there are going to be days that maybe are more extreme like that. And this world has to build more compassion, has to start listening to each other, forgiving each other for the things that were set out of turn or whatever it might be. And so much of what I'm building with STIGMA is all predicated on that, on these experiences that I had, on some pain that I went through, on some growth that I went through, acceptance, forgiveness, you know, all of that, but like rooted in love, rooted in a desire to understand why someone might be behaving the way they're behaving. Because I have a son who is autistic, and he's 4.5, and he's fantastic. And one of the things I've learned in his, you know, he does behavioral therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. And what they always talk about is behavior is communication. So when you take someone like my son who is young and, you know, speech delayed and, you know, has the things that he has, he doesn't speak as much, certainly not as much as a traditional 4.5-year-old. But when you see a behavior in a toddler, neurotypical or neurodivergent, it doesn't matter, they're trying to communicate. And so when we walk around this world and we see someone do a thing that we don't understand, like we're so quick to be like, that guy's a monster, she's not very nice, you know, whatever label we want to assign. And I just want people in this world to take a little bit more time to think, what could be going on in the world or mind of that person that they would be acting in this way or reacting in this way. And so I think we have so much work to do on ourselves as human beings. When it comes to mental health, education is so important. And like creating education around a topic that people weren't even willing to talk about 10 years ago is hard. It is an uphill battle for sure. And so that was a very long-winded answer, but I think it's important to me to say that like I wouldn't be where I am without my dad. And there was pain, and I was hurt. And because of all of that, I was able to create something like Stigma.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot. I mean, there's probably 5 hours worth of content we could talk through if we pick that, you know, apart one by one. But one of the things that I think is, you know, my experience is very different than yours growing up. But, you know, looking and doing the work that I've been doing on myself the last, you know, 5, 6, 7 years, and unpacking some of the things that like don't make sense as a child, but when you look back on it, at least for me, it's like, I find ways to forgive for for like parents that were doing the best that they can. And I find that's a thing you can do with other people. Now that doesn't mean that you have to be a punching bag or be a doormat to people, but like show some grace and know that like, I don't think anyone out there is not doing the best they can with the tools that they have. And no one's getting up in the morning being like, today I'm going to be an asshole, even though I don't have to be. Like there's so much going on with people. And, you know, I was really inspired on Saturday by a friend of mine in her post, because this is, you know, a couple weeks after Twitch passed away from committing suicide. And, you know, she posted this long story about how this really impacted her. And she doesn't talk about it a lot, but she was at that point herself many, many years ago. And she's fine now. And she's done a lot of work and she's really working hard. But like to hear someone that you think has it together and find out that like, I may seem that, but there was a point when I didn't. And it made me think like, you know, we're walking around day to day and you really don't know what someone's going through. Like Twitch seemed happy. He seemed happy. His own family didn't know what he was struggling with. And that is because that man was not comfortable showing his true feelings. And that behind him are millions of other people. So we have to, first of all, be kind, but like give people some grace, give them some slack and, you know, listen, like ask, listen, respond, don't react.
Yes. Well, and if I can build on that, it's just that, you know, you say that man didn't feel comfortable because this world didn't give him places to go feel comfortable. And so like our mission at Stigma is to normalize talking about mental health through storytelling. But when I say, what I always follow up with after that is, and the way we do that is by creating safe spaces for people to talk about their mental health, to practice. So I give the analogy a lot of, if you've never played the violin and someone says, it's really important you play the violin, you would not be thrown onto a stage or put at a dinner party or in a work meeting, handed a violin and asked to play it. Mm-hmm. There would be a process to learning it because it's hard. That process might look like going on YouTube and watching videos about how to learn how to play violin, or hiring a teacher or a coach. But the idea behind it is that,
or a story from someone who was learning to play the violin and then was like, I started here and now I'm
yes,
here.
exactly.
And then it's like hope.
But when it comes to mental health, people are just like, you should talk about it. We should talk about it more. If you need help, just ask. Asking for help is one of the hardest things to do. And so what you have to do is give people a way to ease into it. And I think what that often starts with, learning anything new, is watching someone else do it, or to your point, watching someone talk about how they did it. And so it's hard for me sometimes when I see really well-intentioned efforts in the space of mental health to say, like, let's talk about it and let's normalize it and it's okay. You have to give people a place to go where they can be anonymous for as long as they want to, where they can watch someone else do it, and a lot of someone else's, and especially someone else's that look and sound like them and grew up where they grew up and are of the same, whatever the background identity category is that you want to highlight. That is where you can start. You can start by saying, here are stories you can consume. Here is video content you can watch to see other people doing it. And what's really beautiful about what we do in our app and with STIGMA is so often we're working with people who come through partners that are health and wellness providers. So they're vetted in the sense of, we know that they are, actually navigating these conditions, which is sort of different than what you see on TikTok. There was a recent article that came out about the number of people who have credentials and or who have like a verifiable way of showing that they actually do have the condition that they're talking about having in a TikTok video. So with STIGMA, we care about vetting people and sort of vetting what's going on with them. But
can we talk about that really quickly too? Oh, you finish your sentence, but I do want to talk about the diagnosing, because people are throwing out diagnoses left and right all over the place on social media, and it's insane.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to finish
I was just going to say that, like, so unlike in a place like TikTok, where we don't know, the sources of information aren't vetted, with STIGMA, we want to be the most trusted mental health destination. We want to be the place that when you are a manager and your teammate comes and says, I lost my baby and I need some time off, or your teenager comes to you and tells you they're non-binary, or you are struggling as a man or a non-binary person or a woman, it doesn't matter, and you feel like you can't talk about it, that you can go somewhere where it feels safe to just understand. And with the people we're interviewing, so many of them have the benefit of having gone to therapy before. So they have worked with a professional who has helped them develop the vocabulary to express exactly what they're feeling. And that is a meaningful thing. When we talk about increasing access to mental health support, it won't always look like increasing access to therapy. Therapy is beautiful. No. I have a therapist. Some people need it. Some people don't. It's, to each their
Everyone
own.
needs it. I think everyone needs it.
But the idea being that, like, giving people that language, giving people who may not be able to afford or have access to a therapist for the next decade of their lives, but knowing that they can come into STIGMA, filter by PTSD, filter by depression, whatever it might be, and hear from people who are navigating these life experiences and saying, here's how I think about it, here's how I tell my loved ones to support me. That is democratizing access to that information. So our tagline at STIGMA is crowdsourcing hope. That's what we mean. Giving people the ability, the language to express how they're feeling so that they can go try talking about it is the first step.
I agree. And so I want to touch on that too. And then I want you to actually talk, what is STIGMA? But first, I want to comment on I always say you got to name it first. And I've told this story. I won't tell it, I've told it a couple times. I didn't know anything about mental health until I got to high school, and I met someone who taught me. Anxiety, depression, I had no idea. And then I learned that these feelings that I had since I was 5 or 6 years old were like not normal's not the word I'm looking for, but like it was okay that I had these feelings of like loneliness, these feelings of like not feeling connected to people or things or my everyday life and kind of feeling like I was detached. And it wasn't until I understood that that's depression, that naming it and giving people the terms and the understanding of it. And what I think happens so much with advocacy for mental health, which I love everyone who will talk about it, even if they don't suffer from a specific diagnosis or a specific issue, but to open up the space for those that do, I think is beautiful. That being said, I also feel sometimes that it can come off as disingenuous or checking a box. I don't think it is, but I think it can come off that way, because if someone's saying, this is, and I always say it, like, if you're struggling, 988, that number is there for you. But, as you and I talked about, like, I sometimes feel like when you're in that state of trying to struggle, like 988 is the last thing on your mind. Like you need something more or something different. Or you're struggling too much to even do that. So when people say that, like, I get it. It's a great gesture and it's there and it's a resource we need to make sure everybody knows is there, because we need as many resources as possible. But what I struggle with there is, it's like, and this goes back to what my friend did in her story. It's like, sometimes you need something, you need community, essentially, is what you need. And you need to have someone where you can speak in layman's terms. Like, I don't like to come out and say I suffer from depression, because it's immediately stigmatized. Like, you want to know, like, what those feelings for me are. It's loneliness. It's feeling disconnected. It's feeling like nobody cares. It's feeling like, I could just disappear and everyone's life would go on as if they're their own. So, like, why go through these feelings if, like, it doesn't matter? Like, that's how it feels.
Well, and I love that you said that, because when that's the important part for you, because when we interview people, so we've interviewed over 150 people about whatever that makes them human, because that is what mental health is. Like, that is what mental health is. It's what makes us human. So people will talk about losing their husband. People will talk about parenting a child with medical needs. They will talk about bipolar disorder. They will talk about a schizoaffective parent. Like, it's just all of everything you can imagine. But one of the questions I ask everyone is, tell me what a good day with your lived experience looks like, and tell me what a bad day looks like. And it's interesting because people will sort of fall into some common phrasing of, oh, a bad day, I just don't want to get out of bed. And then I'll dig in more and say, when you don't want to get out of bed, do you force yourself to? Do you stay in bed? If you're in bed, are you scrolling on social media? Are you staring at the ceiling in silence? And then we start to unpack it. And some people will say, I order Uber order Uber Eats every day. And so some people might say, like, my version of depression is literally not getting out of bed, losing my job, not being able to, and that is one experience.
And it changes
no less
too.
valid.
Yeah.
But no less valid is the experience of someone who says, I don't bathe as often. I don't eat good food. I spend more money. I, am using retail therapy or whatever it might be. And I think it matters so much for people to be exposed to these different ways that struggling with your mental health, specific conditions can materialize in your life. Like, how do they appear for you? And unfortunately, depression has this dirty trick of convincing you that you're the only person that feels that way, even though it is the most common, anxiety and depression are the most common mental health conditions in the world. And it makes you want to isolate. It makes you not want to talk to people. And so, to your point of, when people say, just ask for help, just call me, that's one of the hardest things to do when you're really low and feeling down. And so what I wanted to build was a place where people could go when they felt that way. And if all you have in you is to consume, if that's it, if it's just scrolling and watching, that's okay. Because what we're giving you is healthy. It is honest, but hopeful. It is educational. And then if and when you decide you're ready, you can ask for hope from other people in the community, or we can connect you with resources. So it's really about meeting people where they are, because one thing I want to say that I feel is so important to what you pointed out to a point you made earlier about the purpose idea is that there is a very famous doctor named Dr. Tom Insel, and he was the head of NIMH for probably like 35 or 40 years. And he wrote this book called Healing that if anyone is interested in mental health, they should read. And in the opener, he says, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, I worked at this for 40 years. This was my whole career. And I was supposed to, bring the incidence of mental health down and work to decrease suicide rates and do all of these things. And I failed. And that's how he opens the introduction. It's so honest and authentic and vulnerable and true. And he says, and the reason is this: mental illness is a medical problem that requires a social solution.
Yes.
And what they talk about is people, place, and purpose. So it won't all be fixed with a pill, even though for some people, SSRIs and other medication save their lives and help. Right. It won't all be fixed with just talk therapy. The reality is our mental health takes work, just like our physical health does. And some of us are born with the right musculoskeletal structure and endurance and metabolism and these natural gifts that make us healthy and fit and we are excellent at sports with barely even trying. And that is some people. And some people will inherit genes and things going on in their bodies that will make them predisposed to obesity and predisposed to injuries or degenerative disc disease in their back as an athlete. There are all these things, right? Physically, we accept all of them. But if you want to be healthy physically, you got to do the work. You have to eat somewhat well. You have to hydrate. You have to get sleep. You have to those things, get the workouts in. Our mental health is no different. And so to judge someone who is born with such a makeup, sort of with their neurobiology and just who they are as human beings, where they have to work harder and live through experiences where they have to work harder, because our ability to tolerate trauma is one of the things that impacts and influences our mental health. And some of us are born with more of it and some of us are born with less. And it's not something that you can't adjust or work on. But the idea being there are people who live through traumatic experiences and do not develop PTSD. And there are people who live through the same kind of traumatic experience with a similar life situation and do. And the person that does is not weak. They just have a different makeup. They just have to find different things to help them be healthy. So, the reason I called the company STIGMA is because there are a number of misunderstood conditions and life experiences that people misunderstand. And they are not all mental illnesses. Like the DSM-5 and mental illnesses in general are the labels assigned to a collection of symptoms. And so it's way smarter people than I am have talked about this.
Just to clarify, the DSM-5 is it's basically like an encyclopedia that is used to diagnose mental health conditions. So it's like checklists and symptoms and all of that. So for anyone that didn't know that.
Yes, sorry. And thank you for adding that. And I think the other thing that's interesting is there are certain lived experiences that the World Health Organization will recognize as a mental illness, but the DSM-5 doesn't. And so there's so much that we don't know, but I think if we strip everything, strip the labels, strip the defining books and texts and whatever, we're all human beings. Most human beings want happiness and fulfillment. And that can come from a healthy mix of people in your life who you care about and who care about you, a sense of purpose. So contributing time in your life to things that matter, and a sense of place. And that can be a physical place or, in today's increasingly virtual world, that can be a virtual place. I think that's what we should all be kind of striving for and looking for, but also being patient and kind with each other in knowing that we're navigating very challenging situations, sort of globally with the pandemic, but also just in our lives with the stuff that happens and the bodies and minds we're born into.
Exactly. And the thing is like, it's never over. Like getting a diagnosis or understanding the way you're feeling, like that's step 0 in a 1,000+ step process. And, one of the things that I'm noticing around me is, and I've had the luxury, the privilege, if you will, to go to therapy. I've had the privilege to try different treatments. I have the privilege to honestly, talk about it like this, and talk about it on a podcast or talk about it on social media and reach people that way. But I feel like, sometimes what you take for granted when you either, work, have these luxuries, or you don't suffer from the same types of traumas and illnesses and struggles, you sometimes don't give people the space to just, I don't want to say just speak in layman's terms, right? And you just, everyone wants to label it. And I think labels are bad. I think naming it is important, but labeling it is bad because there isn't a one size fits all approach to depression. Like we talked about, there isn't a one size fits all approach to, if you have the, 7, 8, 9 symptoms of anxiety, that's not, we're done. Here's a Xanax. There's so many things that you need to understand about how your body regulates, what triggers you, how can you, better react to this stuff. But before you get to that point, so many people struggle with the basics. Me in high school, not knowing how I had been feeling for 10 years was, symptomatically depression. So I feel like we don't even have those baseline resources, which is where I think something like STIGMA is helpful. And I think all of these, I have so many friends now that are therapists on social media, and they do such a good job of, using their social media presence to say simplify it, I guess is what I'm looking to say, to simplify it so that someone who doesn't have the resources to know what depression is, what anxiety is, what, they're not going on and listening to someone on TikTok necessarily, or someone who's in the comments diagnosing them, who has no business diagnosing anyone with anything. And I just feel like fostering that space to just use the basic terminology to describe how people are feeling is what so many people need and just don't have access to it.
Yes, I could not agree more. And the fact that you talked about 10 years of struggling or suffering, whatever we want to label it, with your mental health and not knowing what it was is actually the norm. So there's tons of research that's been done over many, many decades. And what is known is that the average amount of time between when someone starts to struggle with their mental health and when they first seek support, help, treatment, whatever you want to call it, is 11 years. And I say that when I pitch STIGMA or when I'm in meetings and people don't believe it. They think it's going to be 11 months. They think I say 11, I usually pause and I say 11 years. And so much of that has to do with lack of education, lack of vocabulary.
Yeah.
In the United States, there was a survey done of 50,000 people worldwide to understand, for people who have treatable mental illness, what keeps them from seeking treatment. And the number one reason was lack of trust in providers or the care itself, because think of movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is really old, but like the types of movies that Shutter Island, the stuff that shows what mental health facilities and inpatient ones can look like. People are scared. So number one is lack of trust in providers and care. Number two is not knowing where to start.
What do I do with my job in that case? Like, I feel like I need to go somewhere. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my life. I'll just deal with it. And then it gets worse and you bury it. And then, sorry, number two, please.
Oh, no, that's okay. And then the number two reason people don't seek support is they don't know where to look. They don't know where to start. They don't know what's available. So we, as you mentioned, got that incredible honor from Google of they picked 7 apps as the best apps of 2022. And we got an email a couple of weeks ago that said, hey, we picked you. And we had a moment because we launched this app. We're a team of 3. We are, doing our best to build this into this beautiful thing it can be. And we launched the app on August 2nd of this year. And 2 months later, we get an email from Google saying, 2022. Hey, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. So we launched the app we launched the app on August 2nd, 2020. No, it's okay. I realized that I forgot it's coming in January. So, we got this tremendous honor from Google. Outstanding. For us, it was really exciting because we didn't apply for it. There were 7 companies picked total, 7 apps. One of them is Be Real. It has 10 million downloads. So it was like Be Real, 10 million downloads, Breathwork, 1 million downloads, STIGMA, 100 plus downloads. Since then, we've had thousands of downloads and it's been outstanding. But we were picked as the best app for good. And when we launched our app in August 2nd of 2022. So 2 months later, someone at Google found us and saw what we were doing. And I think the reason it stood out with all of there are 20,000 mental health apps. That was the estimate in 2020. So there are certainly more now.
Cow, I didn't even know that.
20,000. I think what is so differentiated about what we're doing is the stories, because that's what people want. That's what's on TikTok. That's what's on YouTube. And we want people to understand that the way to normalize something is to share our stories. And so we created the platform for people to be able to share their stories, and then to be able to easily find others who share their lived experience. So the way that the app works is it is free. It's available on Android and iOS. So you can go to either store, download it. And when you create your account, you have the option, and it is not mandatory, but you have the option of saying, here are the things I personally am navigating. And it can be a diagnosis. Like for me, I have anxiety disorder and panic attacks. It can be that I am the parent of a child with a disability. It can be that I have been through grief and divorce and things that challenge your mental health. So it doesn't have to be something in that DSM-5 diagnostic manual to be something that affects your mental health. And so people choose to share or not, but we do not have public profiles. I wanted to create in some ways the anti-social media, something that was built the opposite of vanity. So there are no DMs, there are no profiles, there are no likes, there are no comments. The idea is it is a place where you can come and feel safe, to watch stories, to filter by the lived experiences you have yourself, whether or not you've shared your info with us. But when you do share, it is always kept protected and on the back end. And the reason we do it is that there are some lived experiences. I will give a couple, like one, for example, I can think of off the top of my head. Sexual assault or child sexual abuse is a very hard thing to talk about. And so many things are, but that is one where the majority of people who have used our platform to say, I could use some support, here's how I'm feeling, elect to use the option of, I only want other CSA survivors or other sexual assault survivors to see this. And there's beauty in that, because there's that component of, for me, parenting a child with autism is, it's a different experience than parenting a neurotypical child. And that's okay. But sometimes I really just want to hear from people who are on the same path that I am. So my family and friends can be loving and supportive, but there's something about someone who has walked in your shoes saying some things to you that feels so powerful. But when we go to a networking event or a dinner party or a concert, we are not wearing stickers that say, hello, my name is Ariana, and here are my conditions. Here are the things I'm navigating. So it's hard to find those people. And so that information that we do in the intake is so that if someone says, I only want other people with panic attacks to respond to this, they can. But what's so beautiful in my mind is that over 80% of asks we've gotten historically since the beginning of this app existing, over 80% of people say, I will take a message of hope from anyone. And so we just did a push yesterday where we emailed our member base and said, hey, here are some recent asks that could use some love. Will you offer some support? And just, 6:15 last night, we got a flood of like 15 messages all at once. And it was all of these people who took time out of their day to offer kindness to someone. And that's the beauty of it, that loneliness researchers have found that the two most powerful ways to combat loneliness are cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what many therapists practice and use with their clients, and reciprocal social connection. And reciprocal social connection is not the same as me paying my therapist to use her degree to then help me better sort of process what I'm going through, because there's a money exchange. Reciprocal social connection is when someone gets a coffee for the person in line behind them, or holds a door, or is thoughtful of someone for no reason. It restores our faith in humanity. It makes us remember that there is hope and beauty in this world. And I wanted to create a mechanism for reciprocal social connection. That was really the genesis of this idea, so that you can be someone who, my future vision is that people will make offering hope to a stranger in need as common a daily mental health practice as meditation or journaling. We do those things to better our mental health. And there's research to prove that regularly engaging in altruistic behavior, just being a good person, doesn't only improve your mental health, it improves your physical health. And so now we give people this opportunity to say, like, the pain you've been through, if you're in a good spot, you can use that to help a younger person or a person earlier on the journey of that same experience feel like it's going to be okay. Like, give them hope, crowdsourcing hope. Yeah. But the beauty is, we know that there are peaks and valleys. So like, you might be in a valley of depression and then come out of it and be great and be ready to offer hope to someone. And the next day, 12 hours later, you might hit a wall. And we're there for you for that too. I think that's like, for me, it's like what's so exciting, because it's no matter what you're feeling, we got you, we're here for you. This is a place for you. We don't think anything bad. We think you're great. We think you are the brave people going first. So yeah, it's beautiful. I love what we do.
I do too. And what was so inspiring to me, and I've been on STIGMA now for almost a week. I went on last night, and it's funny you mentioned the peaks and valleys, because I was like walking the dog, and it wasn't light enough to do outside, but I kind of got like, this will be a good time for me to hop on and see. And I actually found a person who was talking about peaks and valleys. And the crazy thing is, I was just browsing under depression because, that's what I'm most familiar with. And so this person had, I swear to God, is going through like the exact same thought I was at the moment. And I have been for a few weeks now, trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And so I read it, and he's like, there's peaks and valleys. I'm in a valley. Sometimes I get comfortable here. And I know what I should be doing. I know what I need to do, and I know how to do it, but it's really comfortable in the valley sometimes. And this takes me back to one of the privileged things that I've learned to work on in therapy is when I'm in the valley, it's okay to be in the valley. Just, like I said, build a campsite, not a house. Know that like you have a little bit of time there, and it's okay to feel the way that you feel, and your feelings are valid, but don't build a house there. Get yourself up, give yourself a deadline, give yourself time to grieve, to feel sad, whatever that is, but then give yourself that exit ramp so that you can get out of there. And I just was sitting there, and I'm like, I'm going to hop on and speak to this person and be like, I'm in a valley too, but I'm not going to stay here. And I know what I need to do. And I know what I should be doing, and I know how to do it. And so it was just to be able to find someone that's feeling the same way right now, and then share in the camaraderie, and then maybe share a little tool or a little exit plan. I feel like there's so much value in that for me, feeling validated, to validate this person, but then also to say like, hey, let's get out of this together. Like, we can do this. It's a community. And that's what I think is so interesting on there. And there's no pressure to, I mean, I sat at this desk and I was like hunched over and I'm just like holding my phone up, if you walk like this, because that's how I was feeling. And I'm like, I don't care to turn my lights on. I don't care to, fix my hair. Like, I'm just going to be me. And I think there's something about authenticity and vulnerability that you've tapped into that is, it's almost like a next level of, being authentic on social media. It's like a level deeper. It's a level more important. And I think what you're building there is really good, but I have to ask you, one thing that makes me a little nervous, and I know, and I want you to talk about all the resources and stuff in there. Sometimes, like, when you get a bunch of people together feeling the same way, good or bad, like, it can become like, it consumes, right? So if you get a bunch of people who are suffering from anxiety, suffering from depression, suffering from loss, grief, infertility together, like, how do you make sure that it helps people instead of hurts people or keeps people in a mindset?
Yeah, I love the question. So I'll go into a couple of ways that we sort of plan for that and how we handle it. The first is that the way that it works, where, you saw this post that spoke to you, you were able to offer
I was
a response.
struggling yesterday too, I was struggling yesterday, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I'm like, but I can't just go in there and like see all of these people that are suffering, and like, because I was worried it was going to bring me down, but it didn't. It actually made me feel better. And I gave hope to a few people, and it's interesting because I really was like, and even my therapist was like, be careful, like, you're in a struggling phase right now. Like, don't go in there and like just be in that, a sad state with people, so it's interesting because it had the opposite effect. So I do want to put that caveat in there. It actually did make me feel better to camaraderie with people.
Well, I love that you said that, because that was going to be part of the answer, that like people typically find that that's sort of how it feels. But I always say about emotional capital, and I read this somewhere, so it's not a unique idea of mine, but that it is the one form of capital that you get richer in the more you give it away. If you think about that, like, if we have money in the bank and we give it away, we don't have more money. But if we have emotional capital, if we are willing to take some of the hope, the positivity that we are carrying in that day and give it to someone else, it is a virtuous cycle. It is reinforcing, and it's beautiful. And you're saying this is what happened with you. So I think that's one piece of it. The other is that we intentionally built it in such a way that it is not a traditional social media platform. Like I said, there aren't profiles, there aren't DMing. So in this case where you saw a message, an ask for hope, and I think that's the other piece of it, that you're not going to a forum. Can you
explain what an ask for hope is? Can you explain real quickly what an ask for hope is? Yeah.
Yep. So the way people engage in, like, where anyone listening to this podcast or watching this podcast can engage is you can go in and say, I'm struggling and I need some support. And the way that you do that is either via text, audio, or video. And we did that very intentionally. The reason being that if it's a text message where you do your ask via text, you can be completely anonymous, which means that Tom Brady could go and talk about his divorce and no one would know it's Tom Brady. And the responses he would get would not be from fans who just want to talk to Tom Brady. And I think there's this exciting, potential for celebrity in the sense of like true anonymity. But you can also be me. You can also be someone who has no celebrity or fame whatsoever. And you might just not be ready to connect what you're going through with yourself. You are not ready to say, this is me. It might be the first time you've ever, and I'll go back to the CSA example, the child sexual abuse example. There are people who have never spoken the words. There are women and non-binary people and men who have been sexually assaulted and have never spoken it aloud to anyone. But to create a space where you don't have to, where your mouth can stay closed. And your first step can be fingers on a keyboard saying, this is what I'm going through and I've never talked to anyone about it. Suddenly you are taking a step towards the shame that is surrounding that experience for you dissipating, because shame only thrives in secrecy. So you have this option to do text, audio, or video. We often see that people will sort of reciprocate with an offer of hope to someone in the same format that the ask was. But then there are some people like you and also like me where I love doing video. I'm like, I want you to see that I am a real human and I am here and I care about you, because that's what so many people who are struggling need. Because one of the unfortunate side effects of struggling with our mental health, especially as you get into serious mental illness, is that it affects your behavior. And there are people who are kind, loving souls who have behaved in ways that have pushed people away. So they have a smaller social circle. They've maybe pushed away family members. Those people deserve love and kindness and compassion too. And I think what we've created is this format where whatever your comfort level, you can record a message saying, here's what I need some support with. You are then asked, what is this about? So like, it might be like, this is about navigating divorce. This is about dealing with panic attacks. This is about depression. And then we ask, do you want this to only go to people who have that same shared experience that you just listed? Or do you want it to be shared with everyone? And so once that happens, we moderate every message on the platform. We want STIGMA to be the safest place you can go to talk about your mental health. And what that requires is growing thoughtfully and protecting people's psychological safety. So what I always say is, if someone were to try and troll someone, you haven't done your first ask for hope yet. I can't wait until you do, but you have offered hope, which I love. But let's say you do an ask for hope and you do a video, and someone who has seen the show wants to throw some hate your way about nothing related to this vulnerability that you've put in your ask, but they just want to be hateful. First, let's establish
on Instagram to come to STIGMA.
But like, first let's establish that whoever that person is throwing hate, it's not about you, it's about them. It's about something they're going through that makes them do that. But that aside, traditional social media, especially for people who have larger followings or spend a lot of time there is the risk of trolls and of hate. And I didn't want that. People weren't going to feel safe being vulnerable if I didn't protect them in that way. So in a scenario where your ask for hope is now on the feed, we've moderated it. You haven't said anything that violates our guidelines. We know that you're in a safe place. We publish it and now it's on the feed. And people can either just see it because it's new or filter by a condition and you pop up. If someone wanted to be hateful, not only would you never read the words or hear the words or see the message, you wouldn't even know it existed. You would never know, because that's our promise, is we are protecting you from that. Now, at that point, we engage with the person and let them know that they violated our terms. It has not yet happened at all. Not once. Not once has someone come into our platform and tried to be hateful to someone else. And that's beautiful. But there is a policy we have for if that happens. But then that format, you said, what can people do? So people can download this free app. Before they're ready to talk, they can just learn. They can just watch stories.
And by the way, it's free. It's free. It's not, free for 30 days or a tiered program. Like, everything is free, which I think is, we've talked a little bit about that from like a product perspective and product marketing, which is my area of expertise, but it's free. It's an actual resource to help people.
And to those wondering, how can it be free? Because nothing is free in this world. We are never going to sell our members' data, so it's not that. What it is we know that there are a lot of behavioral and mental health providers who are trying to get in front of people who need help. We know for a fact that according to the data, many, many, many studies, anywhere from 60 to 80% of people with treatable mental illness don't seek treatment. But how do you find people who are not raising their hands and saying, I need help? I believe that if you create a space for people to start earlier in that care continuum, so that 11-year window we talked about, not at year 10, at year 1, at month 2, when someone is struggling, they'll think, I'm going to go to STIGMA. I'm going to kind of like suss out, what's going on. I'm going to look at what other people are saying and see if any of this relates. If and when that person is like, okay, I think I'm ready to find a therapist, to talk to whomever it might be, to join a new gym, to find a meditation studio somewhere near me, we will work with partners that you can find in a resources section. And then we monetize. If you take action in service of your mental health, we monetize, but not from you, from the provider who was trying to find you in the first place. And so we know that, on the business side of things, healthcare and pharma companies are going to spend $15 billion on advertising next year. BetterHelp. If you listen to podcasts, you have probably heard a podcast that has a BetterHelp ad. And this is no discredit to BetterHelp. People have to find customers, but I think there
Yeah.
are better ways to do it. So like if you've watched TV that has any kind of commercial, you have probably seen a pharmaceutical ad for a drug that has absolutely nothing to do with your lived experience. And that is because it's sort of that old school spray and pray method. And what we want to offer is the ability to say, for people who are struggling with anxiety, are there
Yeah.
resources, breathwork as an app, other mental health apps, service providers, therapists? There's so many ways to get support, but there's so much work to be done to first educate people, then make them feel safe enough to say, I'm ready to ask for some help. And then as a last step, connect them with things that could be helpful to them.
And that's what I think is the beauty is you're building this, like I always think back to, so I had a therapist when I was like 21, maybe for maybe a year. And I ended up going to my PCP, my primary care physician, getting on an antidepressant. And I tried a whole bunch of them, and I stopped. And taking that step in 20, we just talked about it yesterday in therapy. I think it was 2016. So it's like 6 years ago, taking that step to just Google therapist. And I have the privilege of knowing that I have this resource. I have insurance. I can go do this. Taking that step to just Google therapist and go like read profiles, like years and years and years of knowing I wanted to do this before I took that step. So what I like about STIGMA and what you were just saying is you're giving people a place to like build the confidence and then connecting them to these resources, because it is you have to have the confidence in yourself to seek help. And here I feel like STIGMA can help build that confidence, and then connecting the resources again, almost. So I think of it, we were talking a little earlier about like BDRs in business, right? Like they're reaching out to people, and I forget, I'm losing all my business terminology. It's been like 6 weeks. They're warming up the leads, let's just say. And I don't want to say people are warming up leads, but like you're soothing their souls. You're giving them the confidence to be more comfortable to seek additional help that they need. And I think it's a good business model, but it's a good human being model.
Thank you. Well, and I think it's also defining what help is, because help isn't always a therapist, and help isn't like, so what I talk to people about is when I say, people say, and then I got help when I interview them, and I go, great. Just like we did before, when you're struggling, break that down for me. What did getting help look like? Did you talk to a friend? Did you go to your parent? Was it a school counselor? Where did they send you from there? Because I think that sharing those stories, and when you watch a story in STIGMA, we have done a lot of work. So you can watch a 7-minute story, tap at the bottom, and it'll show you the chapters. So you can skip ahead. So the section of getting help, good day, bad day. So if you're like, I'm really resonating with Whitney and I want to understand how she got help for her complex PTSD, you can open this little tab that shows you those things, because understanding what the process of getting help looks like and understanding the tools in someone's toolkit are also hugely informational and inspiring and hope giving, because some people will say, it matters that I drink no alcohol, that I get amazing sleep, and that I something else. But for the sommelier or bartender who just had a child, they are maybe not able to like not be exposed to alcohol in some way. No one with a young child is getting any sleep. And so sometimes it can be even more disheartening when you see someone, you go, that's me. And they say the things that work for me are, and you're like, I couldn't do that. I don't have access to that. It can be disheartening. And so what we care about doing is getting personal stories that say that, because that's the thing that primes you. It's not the best advertisement ever by a teletherapy company. It is people who look and sound like you, who you relate to, saying, I tried these things that make you think, I wonder if that thing would work for me. And I think, what I will disclaimer I will say is, you should not pick a diagnosis nor a path of treatment based on any video that you watch on any platform ever. This is about exposure, understanding, perspective setting, so that you can work with a mental or medical health professional who can help you define what that is. But I do think that we need more people talking about this stuff so that more people have a wider frame of reference to make the best decision for them, because it should be made by a mental health professional or your doctor. But you have a voice in that too. You have a voice in deciding what you think could work for you and weighing the options with them. So, want to be clear that that's an important piece of it. But yeah,
can you really quickly oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was kind of trailing off.
Oh, I wanted to ask you. So one of the things you've talked about the stories, right? The story, you're a storyteller. How do you incorporate that storytelling, that filmmaking into these stories? Like, what are they? I know there's, short versions, there's a little longer versions. Can you explain, like, I mean, they're basically documentaries about a human being and their experience. So can you just explain,
Yeah.
what those look like and what people can expect if they go to the Stigma app and engage with a story?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that we have the most of in the app are these personal stories. And it's very different from, say, a testimonial, because a testimonial is usually paid for by a company that wants you to say nice things about their restaurant or their spa or whatever it might be. And so what we do is we get to know people as human beings. So the first question I start every interview subject with is, how did you come to understand mental health as a concept? And how did you come to understand your own? And I will have some people who say, I didn't believe in mental health until I had a horrific car accident when I was 25, and now I have mental health. And that's okay. I'm not there to correct anyone.
Everyone's on their own journey.
I'm right. And I am of the belief that we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. But it's interesting for people to share those things, because that's where others watching can see themselves, or something will resonate. And now they're listening more because they think that sounds a lot or looks a lot like me. So that is the conversation. That's where the conversation starts. And then there are certain questions that I ask, like I mentioned before, that are consistent, so that we have those. What are the tools in your toolkit? Are there things you can do on a bad day to make it a good day? What is a bad day like? What is a good day like? Do you have a message for others who are going through what you're going through? But outside of those questions, it's just a conversation. It's just getting to know human beings. And I think part of the reason why we and I have been successful at this is I love people. I believe every person has a heart worth loving. I want to know more about them. I want them to feel seen and heard and proud of the story that they're telling. So I really, I spend an hour with each subject and we dig into that stuff. What's really beautiful, though, now that we've interviewed over 150 people, is that you start to notice trends in different things. And so when that kind of thing happens, we can put together sort of compilations or shorts. So we have shorts that sometimes are timed with like a month of recognition. So people being understanding of neurodivergence matters a lot to me because it's in my family. And so during neurodiversity and autism awareness or acceptance months, we did a story about autism, but it was told through the lens of a non-binary 13-year-old, a female 20-something, and another 14-year-old girl talking about their experience. Because what the media often shows us when it comes to stories of autism are white males. That's what people think of when they think of autism for the most part. And this goes back to a fantastic TED Talk by a Nigerian author named Chimamanda Adichie that's called The Danger of a Single Story. And essentially what she says is that the number of times a story is told, how it's told, and by whom it's told is the power of the story. So it's not just the story itself. It's what exposure do we have to stories of autism? So, when my son was diagnosed, I was terrified because I didn't know much beyond stories that I had seen in the media, because I hadn't lived through it. I didn't know a lot of people talking about it. And so I think, that's the idea where it matters to tell an autism story that's through the lens of female and non-binary voices that are, of different races as well, because you don't always see that. And because it exists everywhere. These things exist in all human beings. So one piece is these shorts. So there's the individual stories. Then we have these shorts that might be topical. So one is women's mental health. We did one on founders because it is a tremendous stress on your mental health to be a founder of a startup. But then we also have short films, and these short documentaries we submit to festivals. And we have never created one and submitted to festivals that has not been accepted into festivals, which I'm really proud of. We have one that we hope will debut at a larger festival. So we haven't screened it yet because there are a lot of sort of criteria where you have to premiere something at some of these festivals to get in. That's called Queer. And it is a story of people talking about the history of that word, but not one person in that story doesn't identify as LGBTQIA+. That matters. When we want to learn about something we don't understand, the best place is not to go to Google, because if you go to Google, what you will find is a 2,500 word blog post written by an SEO specialist with stock photos that are, and it's not always, not never, but it's not guaranteed that is written by a person who has that lived experience. So if we want to understand something we don't understand, we need to go to the people living it and ask questions and listen. And I think especially as it comes to social justice issues like race and gender and sexual identity, some things, especially in the realm of like gender and sexual identity, might feel so new and foreign to someone who actually does want to learn more about it, that they're
Mm-hmm.
terrified to ask a question. They would never ask a
Yes.
non-binary person they know the questions that would help them be a more compassionate and understanding person to that category of lived identity. And so if we can create the place where you don't have to ask yet, we have just created content and stories that will help you better understand something, we can
Mm-hmm.
build more compassion in the world and better understanding. And so that's, I'm really excited about this story with queer because it weaves in, we have a number of subjects who have very religious backgrounds, and they talk about self-acceptance and being religious and, sort of
Mm-hmm.
holding those two things at once. But the idea behind it is to be a mental health media company that has an app where you can go to learn and to get
Right.
hope, to ask for it, to offer it, and to, when you're ready, find the resources that can help you be the best version of yourself.
And tell the stories, the real stories of people's experiences. And I think, to from my perspective, where I struggle myself sometimes with sharing these stories, but like when I share something, whether it's something I've learned, something I'm experiencing, I get so much gratitude from people, saying, thank you, I needed that. Or thank you, I thought I was the only one that felt that way. Or thank you, these 3 tips helped me with my seasonal depression. Like all of this stuff. And I'm just sharing my experience. But that's so much more important than reading the SEO article. And that's the message I want to give everyone here is talk, be authentic, talk about your experiences, because they're your experiences and no one can take those from you. And people can comment on them all they want and they can have an opinion, and then that's okay for them, but that's not about you. These are still your experiences. So I think this was a great conversation. And I actually think maybe we should have, do another one soon about, being a parent to, a son with autism, and, your experiences with that from a personal level. I think that would be awesome. So at this point, I want to give you an opportunity for the last part here to ask me any questions you might have that you maybe haven't already asked me in our marathon coffee the other day.
I think I'd love to know what got you to a place from the person who took years to schedule your first appointment with a therapist or sort of seek help. How did you get to a place where you so publicly will talk about not only your own mental health, but feel this passion and calling to advocate for mental health?
This is a very personal thing to me. I actually never told anybody that I was suffering from depression until December 26th, 2016. I remember that first time I ever told anyone. And what I would do is I would just withdraw, and sometimes have those days where I couldn't get out of bed. I'd have to call off work. I withdraw. People wouldn't see me for days, weeks, months. And, I got to the point where I was like, this is no way to live. But, since then, like I've told friends, I've, sort of built confidence, like we talked about, as you share it with friends and they're actually accepting, they're not judging. And now guess what? Sometimes they notice when I'm withdrawing and they go a little bit of an extra way. And I try not to do that anymore too. I try to reach out, but, now it's given this opportunity. It's weird. And part of it is there's this expectation, to change when you become, a celebrity, for lack of a better word, or a personality or public figure. I hate that. But, and now it's like, I have bad days. I'm going through a very public and hard, personally hard divorce. And I don't feel like dressing. I'd never feel like dressing up and doing a photo shoot and then, or taking nice photos that take me an hour to set up. Like, that's not me. Like, I take almost everything on my phone by myself or whatever. And that's me. Like, I'm not a celebrity, like, influencer. Like, you're never going to get that from me. I'm going to tell you what my lived experiences are, because I believe that now I know other people feel that way too. And I just want them to know that they're not alone. And that if you have that day where you're in the valley, like, set up the campsite, you're not building a house, like, or I've didn't know what seasonal depression was for the longest time. And then when I learned what it was, and I figured out things that help me, and they might not help you, but guess what? They might help someone. So I'm going to share those. Or when I'm, very, try to be very open about not having, the best childhood. It wasn't horrible. My parents did the best they could, but like, hey, it contributes to a lot of the things that I work on. So I'm learning, like sometimes it's so uncomfortable to talk about, but guess what? That's the authenticity, because it's hard stuff to talk about. And so I embrace it when I'm uncomfortable. Like I said yesterday, even going on the STIGMA app, like I was uncomfortable. It was weighing on me. My day was weighing on me. And, I went on there and I found the peaks and valleys, and it hit me. And so it's like, when the discomfort is part of the authenticity, and that is part of removing the stigma around mental health, to talk about it, to be uncomfortable talking about it. And that's the only way that, I think it's relatable to people. And the other thing is, to lived experiences. These are my lived experiences. Like I had, every which way coming at me, going on this show, after this show, to change who I am, to change what I talk about, to change what I care about. And I'm not doing that. Like, I don't care if someone doesn't like that I talk about my mental health, or doesn't like that I talk about my wellness or self-care routines, or doesn't like that I talk about news and politics, because that's a hobby of mine. That's something that brings me joy, believe it or not. And so these things are important to me, and they're important to people. And it's important for people to see someone struggle with things that they're struggling with, and maybe do it on a little bit of a larger scale. And to me, it's certainly not easy. And there's days that I don't want to do it, and there's days I don't do it. But it's just important to me to be vulnerable, and it's important to me to be my authentic self. And that is someone who is struggling a lot of the days. And so there's going to be posts that, and social interactions, and real life interactions where you can see it. And it's interesting because people DM me. I get so many DMs and messages or comments, and they're like, we can see you're struggling. And it's me making a DIY video on soap, and they're like, we can see in your face you're struggling, and we're sending you love. And yeah, it's hard. I mean, this has been the craziest year of my life. I've become public. I've, went through a very tumultuous end of a relationship, getting divorced, losing my job. Like the hits, they come and they come and they come. And if I didn't acknowledge them in who I am socially and publicly, then I would literally not have social media, and I would never leave my house, because it's every day it's something. And I know everybody else is dealing with that too in their own ways. And I just want to create space for all of us to come together and hopefully learn from each other. That is a long ass answer.
But an important one that gives context to people. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to thank you again for coming on and sharing your story and STIGMA. It's, from what I've experienced so far, it's a great app, and congratulations too on the Google Award, but also more congratulations on you creating space for people that need a space to feel vulnerable. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And one thing I'll share just before I go is we also have a phone number people can text. You don't even have to download the app. If you're just struggling and you want a message of hope from a total stranger, we have a library of videos. So you can text hope to 312-313-1110. Maybe we can put it in the show notes, but we do that. And sometimes that's an entry point for people. They do it and they go, what is this? Real people like offering me hope. You can do it anytime. We get many every single day. People just need a dose of hope, and that's what they do. It won't be customized to your experience, but I hope that anyone who has listened to this and felt inspired, or just sort of ready to take the first step of just consuming. It doesn't have to be ready to talk. It doesn't have to be ready to get help. You may not even know if you need help, or you are struggling, but you're kind of questioning. The app is free. You just search the STIGMA app on either platform, and I will be excited to see some of your audience and fans in our community.
Too. And where can people find you in STIGMA? Obviously, we know the Apple App Store, Google Play Store. social media, where can we find you?
On TikTok and Instagram, our handles are the same. So it's at thestigma.app. That is also our website. So www.thestigma.app. And I am happy to answer questions from anyone. So you can also find me at my email address, ariana@thestigma.app.
Awesome. And those will all be in the show notes. Thank you again so much, Ariana, for coming on.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of Conversations with Nick Thompson. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to follow us and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Links can be found in the description below, and we can't wait to see you next time.